3877.
What's the problem, ma'am?
Well, there's some guy been checking the place out. Well, he went in the back. I have an apartment in the back, and he said he was looking for a guy. And he comes to my door, and said he's looking for an apartment. I live alone. I have an old lady.
Where is he now, ma'am?
I don't have no idea.
For the longest time, this phone call was commonly just referred to as things like old woman murdered during 911 call. For a long time, people speculated that this call is just a hoax, or a choreographed recording for 911 operator training. Eventually, though, the woman's name was revealed to be Ruth Price, and it was learned that the call was in fact real. However, the internet was still having a hard time gathering any further information on this Ruth Price woman, or what her fate was after the phone call. The unfortunate assumption that she was murdered shortly after this call was always the go-to assumption. At the beginning of the call, Ruth begins to give her address as 3877, but is cut off by the 911 operator. During this 911 call, Ruth presents herself as an elderly woman who's concerned about a man who knocks on her door saying he's looking for an apartment. Ruth pauses after giving this information. Then you hear a blood-curdling scream, and Ruth says something about not being able to breathe. Recently, though, information as to who this Ruth Price woman was finally surfaced. Ruth Mildred Starr was born in Pueblo, Colorado on December 7, 1913. Ruth went to Central High School in Pueblo, Colorado, and this was her yearbook photo. Ruth's obituary was recently found, which shows that she died in 1994 in the San Diego Union-Tribune. Ruth was also mentioned in a newspaper section called Assaults on November 3, 1980, in the San Diego Evening-Tribune. In this newspaper clipping, it says Ruth M. Price was assaulted on the 3800 block of 35th Street.
This is Ruth Price of 3877.
This newspaper clipping which you see here fits the Ruth Price 911 call perfectly. It wasn't a hoax, and it wasn't a 911 training call. That blood-curdling scream was unfortunately very real. But fortunately, even in Ruth's old age, she managed to fight off her attacker and live for another 14 years. What seems like a realistic possibility now is that this call was used to shock trainees for 911 call taking because of how blood-curdling and disturbing her panic screaming was, and thus was born the legend of an old woman brutally murdered while on the phone with 911. At least this story had a much happier ending than originally thought.